Hello everyone, welcome back to the reason why you shouldn't wear stripes on camera, where today Bungie has dropped a dev insight. They got another one coming next week that's going to go over abilities and stuff like that. This week is for weapon tuning coming to the final shape. We're talking pretty much all weapon archetypes. We're talking mods. We're talking exotics. Quite a lot to discuss. Some things going to be rotating perhaps into the meta for raiding and endgame type stuff. Some things maybe getting pushed out of the meta. A lot of stuff to be calculated as we go into the final shape, and a lot of testing to be done when we hit the final shape and we hit the new raid and all that kind of stuff. But let's start with a change that I actually wasn't expecting, but one that does make quite a lot of sense. Bungie is straight up removing boss spec, taken spec, minor spec, major spec, and adept big ones out of the game. Those weapon mods are gone. These are all mods that buff your damage against a certain target, and you pretty much always put them into your weapon in PvE. Like, it's just what you did outside of extenuating circumstances. You put minor spec on your primary, you put major spec on your special, and you put boss spec on your power weapon, right? You just did that all the time. And Bungie has gone on to say they've increased base weapon damage almost universally, with some exceptions for weapons that are already really, really good. So, like, we shouldn't feel too much of their effect, but essentially they're trying to bake these mods into the game now. And I don't hate that, because Bungie has a history of doing this thing, right? Most recently, I'd say, is spike grenades on grenade launchers. It's just what you picked every time, and Bungie wanted to reduce its impact on the game and, like, you know, how hard you had to grind for a certain kind of GL. So they were just like, okay, look, we're making it so, like, spike isn't as big of a deal. And going even further back, they mentioned Dragonfly, Surrounded, Rampage. These used to have their own mods that would increase their effects. And then eventually Bungie was like, let's just bake those right into the perks. Because if you had this perk, if you had Dragonfly on a weapon, you were going to use Dragonfly spec. If you had Surrounded, you were going to use Surrounded spec. So now you get to use something different, which is nice. I mean, in reality, are you probably going to use backup mag to get some more ammo in your gun? Probably, because, like, that equals more damage, and you can shoot more, you can use more bullets, and you can shoot more things with the extra shot in the mag. So, like, you're probably going to rotate to that if you're trying to min-max yourself. But if you're in a situation where you don't really need to min-max yourself that hard, throw on an Icarus, throw on a counterbalance, throw on something else that's going to make your experience a little bit better, versus being locked to having to just throw in some kind of a damage perk into your mod slot. I don't hate this change really at all. More freedom in what I want to pick in terms of a mod selection, I think, is always going to be good. Not ever having to feel like I absolutely need to use XYZ thing because it's just there, and that's just mathematically what makes sense. Bungie goes on to say that they are already happy with the damage output of exotic primary weapons and trace rifles. I think I have something to say about trace rifles. So we only slightly reduce their damage bonus versus red bars. In most cases, this means that their damage output is roughly unchanged, since they are going to be receiving the buffs below. The exotic primary buff against red bars, aka minor enemies, is going from 40 to 30%. I would say this, you know, it's not too shocking. Like, you know, if you just blanket buffed a whole bunch of weapons and then left this alone, maybe things start to scale a little bit too high. But I think exotic primary damage is, like, pretty good overall. Like, I still want to use exotic weapons of archetypes that are considered maybe kind of weak. Like, I still like really using Outbreak Perfected. I rail on pulses constantly, legendary pulses, although Bungie has a bit of a counter to me on the pulse rifle situation. But yeah, exotic primaries have, as of recently, still been mostly performing pretty good. So if they needed to just, like, make sure they're staying in the same spot, okay. So we have a bunch of changes coming to a lot of different archetype of weapon across multiple tiers. So, like, there's, like, a base change, and then there's damage versus select targets and all that kind of stuff. And then there are certain exceptions. So let's just see what they had to say. Matching damage changes by weapon archetype. Note that we made some exceptions for exotic weapons that are already really, really good. Except where noted, these changes are PvE only. Note that because exotic weapons can't equip mods, this gives them a larger relative buff than legendaries, because legendaries are no longer able to have these mods in them anymore because they're not going to exist. So what is getting a boost? Pulse rifles, 20%, exceptions, Graviton Lance, and Revision 0 heavy burst mode. These have an intrinsic PvE damage buff built in already. Legendary pulses have been so trash IMO for a while. I think like hand cannons started to finally gain some steam in PvE world again. Like SMGs, I'm not really using them as much anymore. I'm kind of back on hand cannons, but I would love for pulse rifles to be a bit more of the meta game in end game content. Right now, I just think they're very, very bleh. Legendary versions or legendary pulse rifles anyway, they're just not that strong. A lot of the exotics are still really good. So, I mean, again, I like using Outbreak Perfected. It's like one of my favorite guns. So this is just going to juice it even more, which I'm good with that. Pellet shotguns, 10% boost, with the exceptions to Legend of Accuracy, Tractor Cannon, Conditional Finality, and Fourth Horseman. Conditional absolutely does not need a buff of any kind. It would not surprise me. I don't think there's a nerf for Conditional here, but it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the future that Conditional did get some kind of a PvE nerf. It is really, really good. So it not getting any kind of a buff makes sense. I think fusion rifles are pretty dominant in the special slot compared to shotguns. For your just kind of like average, like, all right, I'm running a GM, I'm running this, I'm running that. Obviously, there are some shotgun strategies that do exist in PvE, especially if you want to try on these sort of trench barrel type things. I'm not too up to date on my shotgun DPS strategies other than like slug shotguns, but those are in their own category. So this I absolutely don't mind at all. Slug shotguns also just getting like a little bit of a boost. I'm okay with that. Fusion rifles getting a boost along with snipers, glaives. I mean, snipers, they've just hit the point now where I feel like snipers are like, okay, if I see someone with a sniper on, I don't want to be like, what are you doing with the sniper on, bro? So them getting even a little more juice, I'm cool with that. Fusion rifles, I'm kind of the same way. Like, if you want to give fusion rifles a little bit more juice, I think that's okay. Glaive projectile, I don't think you could do enough to glaives. Glaives have gotten so much, and I still don't think you can do enough. They're just an inherently weird thing, I think, for a lot of the casual audience to try to make use of. So anything to make them more, even though if you know how to use a glaive, like, like if you know, you know. But yeah, I don't, for the general population who plays this game, I don't think there's enough you could do to glaives to boost them. And then linear fusions are getting 5%. I do feel like linear fusions were starting to lag behind a little bit recently. Even just using one for some boss damage phases in Onslaught, I was kind of like, this is all my Cataclysmic is doing nowadays. Like, this feels kind of weak. It feels kind of soft. So I'm okay with this. Now we have only increased damage versus red bar enemies. This stacks with the things that I just talked about. Sidearms, trace rifles, scout rifles, and bows, 20%. Scouts, totally get that. Trace rifles, totally get that as well. I've been using some trace rifles in Onslaught, and I do think they start to fall off once you start hitting wave 31 and later, once that scaling starts to really increase. Bows, okay. Sure. Sidearms are already dealing really, really high damage in PvE, but I mean, they kind of have to because the risk factor of using a sidearm in PvE, if you really want max damage, you got to be pretty close to an enemy. So I think maybe people at the higher end are like seeing sidearms getting a 20% boost against red bars and being like, oh my God, like that is actually kind of crazy. But if you're not maybe at that level, you'd be like, oh yeah, they absolutely need some juice. Like they're knowing who the hell's using a sidearm. And it's like, well, they are kind of usable. And I'm not counting Indebted Kindness. That's basically its own category of like, it is a sidearm, but it's like, do we really consider it a sidearm? It's kind of like the same thing as like Buried Bloodline. It's like, I don't even consider it a sidearm. It's almost like it's its own category of weapon. Am I talking really fast? Should I slow down? I feel like I'm talking so fast. I've had like almost nothing to even eat today, and like water. Was that too? Just let me know if I was just going way too fast. Sorry. I guess I'm just super stoked for weapon buffs and percentages. I don't know. Auto rifles and pulse rifles, 15% boost. I'm down. Pulse rifles are going to be doing 38% more damage. Pulse rifles are basically getting the equivalent of the exotic primary buff for them in final shape. I would love to see pulse rifles make a comeback, man. Would love it. You know, I used to use pulse rifles all the time. One of my highest kill count weapons is a pulse rifle. So I would love to see pulse rifles get a little more juice. And Bungie is like, maybe they're kind of leaning back on like the okay, you know, like even though pulses you get to play really safe and we don't want things that play safe to deal a lot of damage. Maybe they're finally like, okay, but pulses, like, we gotta give them a little something, right? You getting in your bed, Brim? You getting in your little bed? Sniffins, Brims? Are you coming over here now? Yeah, you coming over here? Oh, no, we're not doing this half and half, Brim. I'm still in the middle of a video. Oh, thank you, though. Oh, thank you. Let's get your whole butt over here. Okay, Brim. We do the video together now. Okay, buddy. Where were we? Autos and pulses. Pulses need the love. Autos could honestly use, I think using Quicksilver Storm for as long as I did kind of skewed my brain on auto rifles being like, oh yeah, auto rifles are totally fine, but like they could still use some more juice. Submachine guns actually getting a 10% boost is a little surprising. I do think they fell a little behind hand cannons. I've been glued to Zally's Bane in Onslaught since it came out. So it surprised me a little bit, but like not completely unwarranted. And then hand cannons getting 5%. I mean, even that surprised me. I think hand cannons are in a pretty good spot right now anyway. But okay, fine. You want to give them a little more juice. That's okay. Increased damage versus majors. That is orange bar enemies. Trace rifles 20%. Absolutely makes sense. Again, I think trace rifles in end game content, once you start hitting minus 20, minus 25 levels, you get to the last waves of onslaught, they just really start to fall off. And when you have a weapon that's using green ammo and you're having to treat it like a primary, you got to really make it worth it to be able to like justify its use in higher end content. I like using Cold Heart with my Vesper of Radius build on Warlock. Once I started to hit wave 30, 35, 40, it's just not cutting it anymore. So very, very happy to see that. Increased damage globally, including PvP, machine guns and swords, 7%. Okay. I mean, machine guns, I think, just got a PvP buff. So they're giving them even more. I feel like they're mostly okay in PvP right now. Swords, acceptable. I don't think we've had too many sword PvE, artifact mods recently. So I'm okay with that. Swords are pretty niche. Splash damage from add clear exotic primary weapons were overperforming in final shape when combined with all the buffs. So we're pulling down splash damage by 10% on Sunshot, Trinity Ghoul, Polaris Lance, and Graviton Lance. Fine. Sunshot has been going absolutely crazy. Trinity Ghoul has historically gone crazy in low to mid tier content. I don't think necessarily super high tier content. Like GMs, because you need to be able to chain it for it to really maintain its power, and sometimes that's not always easy. Polaris Lance is just juiced this season because of all the Radiant stuff. Maybe there's some more Radiant stuff coming next season. And then Graviton Lance, yeah, okay. I know it's performing very highly right now. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I'll sign off on it. Okay. Several releases back, we gave kinetic weapons a substantial damage bonus in PvE to account for it being harder to use than subclass builds, right? Because kinetic weapons don't really synergize with anything, so they needed to give them a reason to be used. Because otherwise, why wouldn't you just use a weapon like Callus Mini Tool for Incandescent or some other SMG with some sort of subclass thing on it, right? In general, we're okay with leaving this in place until we have a better defined role for kinetic weapons, but the bonus damage versus boss tier combatants was making it hard for other weapon types to compete. For example, a kinetic sniper rifle and a stasis sniper rifle of the same subfamily will both deal the same amount of damage to a boss in final shape. Kinetic type damage weapons no longer deal bonus damage to bosses. Damage to other combatant tiers is unchanged. Okay, so this, I feel, it does really feel like it is targeted at sniper rifles specifically. Like, you know, you're thinking Succession, you're thinking Nagi, you're thinking Izanagi. This sounds like it would be affecting Izanagi to some degree. So Izanagi rotations gonna be affected maybe a little bit. You know, I know the damage calculations recently towards the higher end, like things are pretty close. So there's gonna need to be some recalibration done. I still think Izanagi is gonna have life to it in some sort of DPS rotation type setup where you're going Nagi and then hit something with a primary, and then you're switching to like a bait and switch auto loading type thing, whatever people are doing right now. But it's something to look out for. Made some quality of life changes to several weapon types, updated heavy, adaptive, and aggressive burst intrinsic names to match burst count across all weapon archetypes. Okay, so 2 burst is heavy, 3 burst is adaptive, and 4 burst is aggressive. So they're just kind of switching up the naming conventions to keep it a little more organized. Okay. Remove the Foundry name from Viced, Rapid Fire, Hake, Precision, and Omelon Adaptive Intrinsics. Okay. Scout Rifles updated, hip file, red. Okay, fine. Hand cannons, some aggressive hand cannons were struggling to compete with the stats of the top tier examples like Igneous Hammer. So Criminal's Dagger and something new, which is returning in Final Shape, getting a little bit of a stat boost, it looks like. Low inventory snipers were a little too low in PvE, so they've increased the minimum 14 to 17 shots. I think I was using Irukanji. Is that how you say it? I forget the exact name. That thing was getting like 27 shots, no reserves. That was pretty nice. Linear fusion. Linear fusions. Adaptive burst and linear fusions are strong, but in some cases quite hard to control. Reduced firing animation, kick, and recoil for adaptive linear fusion rifles. Okay, interesting. Making 3 bursts potentially a little more viable. I know they were pretty steady. I'm thinking kind of back to Storm Chaser. That thing was not like the worst to control, but now you have something like Doomed Petitioner, which is arguably a best in slot linear fusion, came out this season. Please go get that weapon, by the way. Get the weapon pattern for it. Now I'm looking a bit more at Doomed Petitioner. I'm kind of like a Cataclysmic guy. I liked using that. I wasn't a huge fan of the burst. Kind of for this reason. It was, you know, very unforgiving with stuff like Precision Instrument, especially on Doom Petitioner, where you need to be hitting those crits every single time or you got to start over. So those crits are super important. So that's going to kind of maybe indirectly buff the burst linear fusions because it's going to be easier to maintain those crits. Waveframe grenade launchers deal competitive damage as of Into the Light. Some of these stats didn't have a gameplay effect, like blast radius. So they're doing what makes the most amount of sense and what I was hoping they were going to do with blast radius on waveframes. The higher your blast radius, the wider the width of the wave, and then also like length and height will also be scaled, but it's mainly going to be the width of the wave. So the default display stat for the blast radius has been changed to 150. So 50 is the previous like baseline. So anything over 50, that's going to widen it. Anything under 50, if it even is possible to go under, I mean, I'm sure it's possible to go under 50, is going to kind of make it a little more slim. Absolutely makes sense. I'm very glad that they're doing this. I'm still really not using waveframe heavies at all, but at least for specials, that's kind of okay. Although there's a couple of nerfs coming. I should say a couple of nerfs coming to Forbearance. It's all kind of targeted at Forbearance. But special ammo waveframe GLs overperform as ad clear weapons in their current state. What a freaking surprise. So we've pulled the length of the wave back a little bit. So instead of 22 meters, it's only 15 meters, except for Dead Messenger, because you're kind of committing your exotic slot to doing that. Very understandable. Special waveframe GLs have been absolutely cooking for a super long time. Forbearance with the Ambitious Assassin chain reaction has just kind of been the standard for a very, very long time. So this should not come as too much of a surprise to pretty much anyone who uses a waveframe GL. Swords, updated sword article to better indicate charge state. Okay. And we got some bug fixes as well. I'll let you guys kind of skim through that one. Let's get to exotics. Okay. Starting with Divinity. Okay, what are we cooking with Divinity? Divinity's ability to bypass combatant gameplay by generating a weak spot called a cage internally on command has too high of an uptime as it stands, particularly with trigger feathering. We're not changing how effective the cage is or how feathering works. So that's like tapping it to maintain the cage, but retaining a bunch of the ammo. But we are increasing how long it takes to generate the cage in the first place, which will make it less ammo efficient and less useful against targets that break aim frequently. Interesting. Increase the number of shots required to generate the cage by 75% against combatants. PvP unchanged. Imagine being in PvP and someone hits you with a div bubble. You get DPS. It's been a while. Wow. Okay. Man, I think this kind of takes me by surprise because I've rotated Divinity out of my repertoire for the most part. Like, my team has pretty much exclusively switched over to Tractor Cannon, especially with Strand Titan being as strong as they are. So, wow. Okay. I mean, you know what? Good on you, Bungie. Good on you. Okay. All right. I think this is going to make a lot of people mad. But sometimes you got to make the tough calls, you know? And this maybe is a tough call to make. I don't know. I haven't used Div in such a long time. I feel like I don't have as much of a perspective anymore on Div. I never really felt like, you know, after the nerf, it was a huge deal. I also figured a lot of people switched over to just like chaining tethers on Hunter, or you're just running Tractor Cannon or something like that. But okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Making it so if you really want that boost, you're going to really have to commit to it. You know, I'm thinking who's really moving around a whole lot in terms of raid world. Rolk is doing a bunch of dashing. I mean, Nezzy, maybe. Nezzy he goes like up and down and he teleports away and stuff. So like anytime he teleports, you got to re-up the cage. Thank you, Brim. Thank you. I'm trying to think like Pantheon now. You're probably not using Golgoroth. You're not using Oryx. Definitely not doing that. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's not too many bosses. I'm just like kind of in Pantheon mode right now, so forgive me if there's like a couple that I'm potentially missing. But I guess it's kind of like Rolk mainly because he just kind of dashes around. I mean, you could still maintain the cage. It's just you know, you gotta be on your stuff. You gotta know how far he dashes. You gotta know the exact direction he dashes. You gotta track him really cleanly. It's possible to do. It's just it's tough. So okay, Divinity takes more ammo now. All right, who saw that coming? Rat King's firing animation makes the weapon hard to control at high rate of fire. So they're just changing the firing animation to be the same one as auto fire items. Fine. Devil's Ruin firing animation fixed an issue. Okay, fine. Symmetry. Okay, Brim. Symmetry. Symmetry is my favorite exotic that I don't use. Needed a little attention. Particularly its reload speed and handling. I don't know if that's exactly where it needed attention. So we took this opportunity to increase those via Catalyst. You get 10 tail and reload speed, 10 handling, and Eddy Current in addition to its existing effects. And I believe Eddy Current is getting some kind of a buff. I don't know if that was really the problem. I think it was mainly that just like it's a scout rifle and scout rifles are kind of like right now. With the exception for like a couple of them. So, okay, I'll take a little symmetry buff. I don't know if it's exactly what I was looking for, but, you know, it's something. Gjallarhorn's Wolfpack rounds always look like arc projectiles regardless of the weapon's actual damage type. Updated the visuals of Wolfpack rounds to match the damage type of the weapon. So on G-Horn, they're going to use Solar. On like Royal Entry, which is Void, they're going to look like Void. Okay, that's cool. I'm cool with that. Touch of Malice's burn from the darkness ball didn't last long enough to be useful in PvE. Ain't that the truth? I actually use Touch of Malice. I feel like I'm one of few who actually uses Touch of Malice in some kind of a build. I use it on my Void Warlock Briarbinds setup. I never use the darkness ball. It takes a while to like trigger the special reload and then shoot it out, and then you gotta rebuild your stacks all for what was 2 seconds of an effect. Now it's 3.5. Okay, I think it could maybe use even more. It was just a lot to commit for something that was so lackluster, and then you gotta build back up again to your 1 bullet in the chamber for the giga damage. So I'll take it. I don't even know if you went far enough. You might be able to juice that even more. Osteo Striga made it too easy. Oh boy. To spread poison across a whole encounter from a couple of kills of weak combatants. Now has a 4-second cooldown on the poison burst on kills. Poison burst from sustained damage does not receive the... Okay, that's fine. Okay, so the Striga Necro setup, Strand Warlocks, I'm looking at you, no longer as powerful. 4 seconds sounds like a long time. I would like to see how that does affect gameplay. I don't want to call the build just like dead or anything like that, because I don't think it will be, but that is going to be going from instant no cooldown to a 4-second cooldown that might hurt a little bit. Maybe not on higher difficulties where things aren't dying as quickly. So that way, you actually have time between those kills for it to keep proccing the poison burst. But that is something. It surprises me just because they've left Osteo Striga alone for so long, even though the build could be really, really crazy. So I think that's why what they're doing doesn't surprise me. Just the fact that they are doing it surprises me. Necrochasm's add clear roll wasn't as strong as we like. I believe Bungie talked about Necrochasm in the past and how they were going to buff it. So we buffed it. Okay. And replace the Outlaw perk with on the Catalyst with a new custom perk that leans into this role. Intrinsic perk now provides increased reload speed after precision kills. Cool. I still don't think there's anything on changing it back to how it was in D1 where you could just get any kill and you would get the Cursed Thrall Explosion. Increase the duration of burn applied by the Cursed Thrall Explosion against combatants okay, so kind of the same thing as Touch of Malice. And then the Catalyst, 1 for Thrall. I love me some blank for all. Damaging 3 combatants in quick successions provides a period of increased damage, range, and aim assist. I'm interested. Any kind of 1-for-all type thing, I'm going to be taking a look at it. Increased damage, increased range, I'm interested. Very, very interested to try out Necrochasm a little bit. Want to see how much the damage increases. It would kind of surprise me if it gave you the full 1-for-all 35% situation. I think it would surprise me. The Lament. While the Lament's damage is roughly equivalent to other swords, the healing on hit largely removes the intended downside of using a sword for boss DPS, which is that risk factor, and the chained heavy attack was too strong. Reduced healing by 20%. While this weapon does inherit the 7% global buff, they are reducing the damage of the high end of the chained heavy attack from 20% from that point. This means combos at lower stacks are less affected by the charge than combos at higher stacks. Wow. Okay. I mean, that is tough to argue. The healing could just pretty much keep you alive through most things. I'm kind of thinking back to when was the last time I used Lament with a ton of seriousness? I'm thinking Duality, first boss, Galron. And there were plenty of times where literally just me swinging that thing kept me alive. And so 20%, I still think you're going to be able to live through a bunch of things. But it's a chunk out of the healing. It's a chunk. You're actually going to have to maybe pay attention to your healing a little bit more. But yeah, okay. Little surprising. It's not a complete annihilation of the weapon or anything, but interesting to see that they're trying to pull that in line. Dead Man's Tale rapid fire hipfire fantasy isn't landing as well as we like. Bumped up the rate of fire, added some stability to Cranial Spike to make it easier to control. At the same time, it's a little strong on mouse and keyboard, a little weak on controller, so they're tuning some accuracy and magnetism stuff to address this. Baseline, Cranial Spike now grants stability in addition to aim assist and range. Increased reload speed benefit with Catalyst when hip firing, reduced accuracy benefits, increased, removed PvE only damage buff that's scaled with stacks of Cranial Spike and added a 15% damage bonus at maximum stacks of Cranial Spike. I am not going to lie to you guys. I have not used Dead Man's Tale in probably multiple years. My insight on this is pretty low. So I'm going to take Bungie's word for it on this one. I used to use this thing quite a lot in its first iteration, which quite frankly was kind of insane. So I don't have a ton of insight on Dead Man's Tale. I can't even tell you the last time I busted the thing out. So DMT expert, Dead Man's Tale experts, hit the comments. Let me know. The Colony. When was the last time the Colony even was said in patch notes? Now spawns additional insectoid robots on final blows. More robots, up to 5, spawn from tougher combatants. Dude, I would love to see like 1 or 2 shots of the colony just completely wipe out a wave of enemies. This has needed a buff for so long. I didn't even need to read what this was. I could just see the colony. Oh, they're buffing it. Yeah, I'll try it out. I'll mess around with it. Truth has fallen far behind other exotic rockets, largely due to its lackluster damage. Wanted to lean into that for total rocket count. Okay, so increased AoE damage such that it doesn't lose noticeable damage due to it not dealing impact damage. Horseshoes and hand grenades means it's exploding. Do they still call it horseshoes and hand grenades? I'm going to check. They do. It's still called grenade. Oh, it's called grenades and horseshoes. Never mind. I just saw horseshoes and I was like, I'm right. Yeah, so projectiles will detonate while they are within close proximity of their targets. So you're not really dealing impact damage. And impact damage is a really big part of rockets. It's a good chunk of damage, right? So I like this change. I like that they're increasing the damage of it, so that way it can maybe actually be viable, and increase total reserves by 3 on top of a reserve change to high impact rockets from 7.3.5. Okay. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be entering, the meta anytime soon, because it's got to compete with some other rockets that are really, really strong. But at least like they're getting, it's getting closer now. At least they're in the same universe, right? Nobody, you were using Truth for PvP pretty much exclusively if you were even using it. Queen Breaker. That's all I need to read. Increased damage versus bosses, mini bosses, champions, and vehicles by 12%. Increased reserve ammunition by 3%. We do see frequent requests to move Queenbreaker to the energy slot, but given the number of special ammo damage options in the slot, we've opted to push it further in the heavy slot. We're also we're working on some functionality changes to this weapon for a future update as well. So I actually unironically used Queenbreaker on day 1 of Onslaught because of the blinding effect that it gets. I think a lot of people just don't even know that Queenbreaker like does that. 12% sounds low. I don't really know much about Queenbreaker's damage output. It's not something that even crosses my mind. Maybe now it needs to, and we got to do a little update on like how good is its damage actually. But this is a weapon that has largely been ignored since it got nerfed in like Gambit. Like when? 5 years ago? Something crazy like that? Buff it. Let's do it. The power from Cerberus +1's Focus Fire perk from the Exotic Catalyst was limited by it always being available. We've changed this to only being available following a kill, allowing us to increase its strength. I'm going to make a call real quick. Calling my resident Cerberus +1 expert right now.
Hello.
Hi, buddy. I'm recording a video right now, and Cerberus +1 is getting a change, and I wanted your take on it.
Okay. What's the change?
So the Focus Fire perk from the Catalyst, they're changing it. So now it'll activate on special reloads following a kill and will no longer reduce range or rate of fire. How do you feel about that?
Oh, that sounds awesome. Wait, that sounds dangerous. That sounds awesome. It's dependent on you getting a kill?
Yeah, so they said the Exotic Catalyst was limited by it always being available, so they didn't really want to like touch it. So now that they're making it like something that you need to activate after doing something, they are increasing its strength as a result.
Gotcha. Yeah, could be cool.
That's my vibe as well. I think it looks kind of neat, and I think think there's a crowd that sleeps on Cerberus +1 in general. That thing can chunk some targets close range.
Yeah, for sure. It's always been really good at shutting down dumb titans holding W with a
you're going through a tunnel. I gotta go, buddy. I'm not a dumb titan. In a world where Bastion has competition for a fusion rifle in the kinetic slot, we felt that it was time to lean further into emulating Saint 14's combat style. Dealing damage with melee increases your charge rate, damage, and reload speed for a short duration. Landing a majority of pellets in a burst increases melee damage. Okay. Again, Bastion, I've seen it get used here and there before. Some of my friends will bust it out for very, very specific things. I have not touched Bastion in I don't know how long. Have not used this thing. So I'm interested. This thing can maybe start really doing some chunk damage to certain targets. And I think it also has an intrinsic. Yeah, it has built-in unstop. Yeah, that's what I thought. So dealing damage, it's not even getting a kill. It's dealing damage with melee increases your charge rate, damage, and reload speed for a short duration. Maybe now kind of like I'm thinking like a champion killer type weapon, potentially. Depends on how much the damage boost is. I'll take a look at it. Ariana's Vow used to be like literally the champion of champion killer weapons. Had a really long hot streak. Has fallen behind other anti-barrier special weapons, and as a solar weapon has the opportunity for a subclass tie-in. Yeah, Ariana's Vow, when it first came out, dominant weapon. It has fallen off really hard since then. Breaking a matched shield or piercing a champion's barrier will cause the target to ignite. Ooh, okay. You're kind of talking my language now. Every time you pierce a barrier champion, you're going to get a free ignition on that. That's a nice little extra chunk of damage. Plus any sort of ignite effects that you might have on like a fragment or something. That's just going to be a way to AoE down a bunch of enemies around a champion. Or just like, you bust like a bunch of wizard shields, you just go, ignite. I'm interested. I'm very interested. I know Ariana's Vow, like itself as a gun, maybe feels like a little So that's where I would still have like some hesitancy on like, am I really going to bust out the Ariana's Vow? But I mean, you're giving me an ignite just for popping a shield. Like, you tell me you're not going to at least look at a clip of it? Come on. Deterministic Chaos. Some people don't even know that this is an exotic. You got pretty much everyone in the world got this, tried it out for 5 seconds, and was like, "Oh, okay, cool. I don't need this." It is a void machine gun exotic. Didn't have a clear niche when it shipped. Yeah, no crap. So we've redesigned it to be an anti-champion and weakening powerhouse. Intrinsically anti-barrier. Okay. The heavy metal and vexadecimal perks have had the locations and behaviors swapped. So heavy metal now causes every 4th bullet to make targets volatile, and every 16th bullet to also weaken targets. So yeah, you didn't need to weaken a target every 4 shots. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So this swap, I mean, makes a ton of sense. And also this thing just needed all the love in the world. The machine gun slot is so fierce in its competition that I still don't even know if this is maybe enough. The chaining of volatile makes it feel like, okay, it's got a little bit of life to it now. And, anti-champion weakening powerhouse, you're going to be slaying out barrier champions pretty nicely. But like, barrier champions are probably one of the least egregious champions in terms of like ease of kill on them. Like, it's not tough to kill a barrier champion. So I don't know if we need a weapon like purely dedicated to it, but I'll take it over what it was, which was a hot pile of nothing. The fundamentals now maintains its state across death or respawn. The fundamentals is the perk where you could swap your element on Borealis, Hardlight, and Dead Messenger, but you didn't need to be swapping your damage type so rapidly, so it's irritating having the current damage type clear on death. Thank you, quality of life change. Perks, and then I promise we're done. Alacrity, working in solo activities intended. It's too strong to have 100% uptime in PvP, so it doesn't work in Rumble anymore. Archer's Gambit has been brought down so it can be used on legendary weapons. Reduced draw time buff from 66 to 60%. Reduced buff duration from 8 to 4 seconds, but now it can stack up to 8 seconds. Okay. Archer's Gambit is not Archer's Tempo. Archer's Gambit is on Hush, the bow, which I know has like an insane fan base. And Archer's Gambit, hipfire precision hits, grant a massive draw speed bonus for a short duration. So Archer's Gambit can actually be put on some other bows. Hush enjoyers rejoice, I suppose, because like this doesn't really seem like too drastic. Okay, Hush enjoyers, there you go. Grave Robber needed some extra love. True. Will now activate on dealing damage with a powered melee in addition to standard melee kills. I'll take it. Chain Reaction, too strong on special ammo weapons in its current form. Forbearance. So we've branched it between heavy and special ammo weapons, and we'll be shipping it on new special weapons in the final shape. About 15% smaller AoE size and 20% less damage on special. Same AoE as before and 30% more damage on heavy. Bungie said that this was coming. I think that they've said it multiple times. Chain Reaction, something like Forbearance, goes absolutely insane. It's had its reign of terror. I'm okay with it getting kind of slapped down. I'm actually more stoked to see the heavy version getting some kind of a buff, really pushing it as like a super ad clear thing for heavy weapons. Maybe I might actually start using GLs outside of, damage windows on bosses now with some sort of chain reaction. I mean, you can get so many different kind of edge transits right now. So maybe just get one. You might as well throw it in the vault for now, and then we'll reevaluate. Eddy Current was a little too slow to activate and didn't provide a strong enough bonus, particularly when amplified. Is anyone using Eddy Current at all? It's like Eddy Current is like insta delete. Now it takes 1.5 seconds of sprinting instead of 3 seconds. Also provides a bonus to handling and a 5% scalar on each stat at base. Being amplified will immediately activate the perk at its maximum effectiveness. If we want an exact wording for Eddy Current, temporarily increases reload speed after sprinting. This effect is improved when you are amplified. 20 reload speed for 3 seconds after sprinting for 3 seconds. Brother, if you're amplified, you get 60 reload speed. Slightly better. Yeah. Bro, you think I'm taking Eddy Current over literally any other reload speed perk? You're out of your mind. I still don't even know if I'm going to take it, but at least maybe I'll take a look at it. Underdog was shelved a long time ago. Underdog is so underused. They are swapping all instances of Underdog with Pulse Monitor. If you have any weapons with Underdog, it's not going to have Underdog anymore. Fallout. Osmosis and Permeability have some interesting build crafting potential, but when all they do is change a damage type, they don't have enough general utility. It's also irritating to do. These no longer drop off when pulling out a ghost or similar actions. This could be used on quite a lot of things. I think one of the biggest offenders right now is Taraba in Onslaught with like how often you're picking up stuff. I know I've seen a bunch of complaints about Taraba. This probably needs to be applied to a bunch more other things. And now partially refill the weapons magazine on activation. So they just made it like less frustrating to use. These are really going to be locked to like hyper specific builds that people want to do. I think they're neat to have for the game, but they're not really buffing them too much. It's just like making it less annoying to use. Chill Clip. The buff is coming. Rather, the unnerfening is coming. So a while ago, they made it so Chill Clip basically required 3 shots on pretty much everything, and it used to be 2. Now it scales based on the charge speed. So Riptide is still going to take 3 shots to freeze, but slower firing fusions like Deliverance, like Arvandil, am I getting that right? Arvandil, FR6, yep, got one of those. I got a Reconstruction Chill Clip. Feel free to maybe bust that sucker out. That's only going to take 2 shots to freeze. Huge quality of life change. Love that. I don't need to stick to Riptide if I want to be optimal. High Ground's functionality. That's where you get a 20% damage bonus if you're on literal higher ground than your enemy. Wasn't delivering on the concept strongly enough, aka nobody used it. So we've granted it better baseline functionality while retaining the fantasy. Reworked to provide a stacking damage bonus when getting kills in any context, like Rampage, or instantly granting the maximum amount of stacks when damaging an enemy from the high ground. So it's basically like Adrenaline Junkie and Pugilist, but for being on a cliff. PvE max bonus is 25%, PvP max is 15%. And you're getting this when you damage an enemy from high ground. Okay, maybe all of a sudden high ground is maybe getting a little more use now. I mean, instant 25% damage bonus just from being high. Remember that your feet need to be on the ground to activate high. You can't just like jump and shoot and get the damage bonus because that would be ridiculous. So you got to be on actual flat ground. But okay, I mean, we'll see how viable it ends up being. Is it going to pull me away from One For All? I don't know, because One For All, I just don't even need to think. I just shoot. But it's certainly more enticing than what it is right now. Killing tally on 21% Delirium is updated to match the version that currently exists. That, I mean, doesn't surprise me at all. Perks that currently match your equipped subclass has been changed as follows. Osmosis and Tessellation now match the damage type of your equipped grenade. So this is prismatic. We're talking prismatic right now for the future. And permeability and elemental capacitor now match the damage type of your equipped super. So I was getting a bunch of questions on like, how are those things going to work with prismatic? My guess was that it was going to be whatever your equipped super was. For I'd say most things we now know, okay, for osmosis and tessellation, which are both based on your grenade, it's going to be for your equipped. So like, yeah, that makes sense. All this makes sense. Deconstruct had a variety of issues that cropped up when it started to appear on AoE weapons. It's been updated to address bugs and prevent exploiting ammo generation. Okay. Now refills from reserves instead of from thin air, and should trigger more reliably across weapon types. I did not dig too deep into Deconstruct. I knew that there was a lot of stuff going on with Edge Transit, with Tusk of the Boar from Iron Banner, the Strand wave frame. Bungie has caught on. I need to go look at a lot more of the data and a lot of what people were dissecting with Deconstruct. It's just not something I looked a ton into. But from what I've seen, people are probably punching air right now, like, oh, we just did all this stuff on Deconstruct. It's probably still worth maybe keeping one around in case we have some sort of vehicle situation in the raid. I don't know, like something's classified. Someone's going to come out with like, actually, boss number 4 is classified as a vehicle, and therefore you should Deconstruct. Keep one around. Keep a couple of rolls around just in case. Final Shape raid comes out. We're going to know what's the best. Just throw it in the vault for now, and we'll see what happens. I need to do my own research on Deconstruct. Yeah, not something I have a ton of familiarity with, so maybe Deconstruct experts speak up in the comments. This video has gone way too long, so I'm going to just cut it right now. Next week, we're going to have some more stuff to talk about. Be on the lookout for another sandbox-focused article coming on May 22nd about abilities and exotic armor. So I'll see you right here next week for another long video with maybe Brim on my lap. He's so hot. Brim, it's 1,000 degrees in here, bud. Do you want to say goodbye to all the people?
Oh, look at this little face. Look at that chomper.
Brim said, bye, everybody. Look at my teeth.
Chief.
Okay, bye.